Hi, Wool Academy podcast listeners. Welcome to today's episode. This is episode 116. And today is yet another new series that I'm starting with the Wool Academy podcast. And this is a series that I'm doing in partnership with the Schneider Group and their integrity scheme called Authentico. If you've been listening to the Wool Academy podcast for longer, you may already have listened to my interviews that I did with Giovanni and Marco Schneider, who are the owners and the leaders of the Schneider Group. You may also remember an interview with Willy Gallia. He is now the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Schneider Group. And recently I've also done an interview with Ralf Kunert from Naturamus, and he is a customer of the Schneider Group buying organic certified lanolin. And in this episode, I'm actually speaking to one of the Authentico wool growers. And Authentico is an integrity scheme by the Schneider Group. And Authentico ensures that the wool sourced under the scheme is mulesing free, that it adheres to the highest environmental standards, animal welfare standards, social standards, and that it is also fully traceable from the farm all the way through the supply chain. But in addition to all this integrity and traceability and transparency, the scheme is also about telling the story of wool and telling the wool grower's story. And this is where I come in with my podcast. So I've partnered with the Schneider Group to regularly interview Authentico certified wool growers so that they can also tell their story and give an insight into their work and into their life and what is important to them about sustainability and animal welfare. So in this episode, I'm speaking with Richard Daugherty, and he is a wool grower based in Australia. He's originally from South Africa and moved in 2011, I believe, to Australia with his wife to start sheep farming and growing beautiful wool. And I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and I hope you do too. So before we start, one more little announcement. The Schneider Group is also organizing a wool conference that takes place on 6th to 8th of October 2020, and it's called Wool Connect. It's an online conference via Zoom, and there will be each day a 2-hour session filled with wonderful speakers from retail to wool industry representatives to wool service providers. And the common topic is sustainability, animal welfare, as well as storytelling and traceability. So a lot of different topics that are all very key to the wool industry. And I do encourage you to check out their website and even consider attending. A ticket is only $50, and all Wool Academy podcast listeners are invited to attend the conference with a 20% discount. So if you're interested in attending, then you can use the discount code Wool Academy 2020. So that's written all together, Wool Academy 2020. And when you apply that code during the checkout, you will get the 20% discount. So I will link to the website in the show notes, and I do encourage you to have a look. I will be moderating the event, so I would love to see you there as well. Thanks, and now enjoy the interview with Richard Daugherty. Well, hello, Richard. It's wonderful to have you on the Wool Academy podcast today. Thank you so much for your time and being here.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. Most appreciated.
Yeah, and I really look forward to our discussion today. We have a lot of questions that I prepared, and let's get started by you giving a short introduction about yourself, like where you live, where you're based, and what kind of operation you are running.
We live in New South Wales in Australia, in an area which is in the northern tablelands, which is it's a high winter winter rainfall. Well, we predominantly get a summer rainfall, but we had altitude, and so the winters get really cold in the New England. We've been over here about coming on 9 years exactly now. In July this year, it's been 9 years, and my wife Sarah is Australian from Sydney, but we met in the Okavango Delta in Botswana, where we both lived and worked in Botswana, and I'm South African from Durban.
And what, like, yeah, I read on your website that you are originally from South Africa. And what did you do originally in South Africa together with your wife? And then what made you decide to move to Australia and start sheep farming?
Well, it's been an incredibly checkered past. You know, the tradition of being in a job for 45 years or whatever it is and you only have one job in your life. I did building science as a Bachelor of Science in building management at the University of Natal. But my family, my grandparents had a sugarcane farm in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. So I have always had an element of being connected with the land. I've had a very strong association with nature. And that was as long as I can remember. And I always had a hankering to go back into and get back into the bush. And so I decided to leave the corporate life and I moved to Botswana. And then I ended up working at elephant back safaris and wilderness and building lodges and being a specialist guide and a professional photographer. And that's where I met Sarah, and we had our first child there in the Delta in Botswana. And it became really difficult with a young child and always being away. I was on safari, close on 300 days a year. And so it wasn't good. So we decided to leave and move to South Africa. And I stayed in hospitality in the sense that we set up a horseback safari operation in a World Heritage site in a place called Isimangaliso, on just north of Durban and just below on the coast. So it was a place where you could ride, and then, you know, you could see whales and then elephant and rhinoceros and leopard all in one day. It was incredibly beautiful. And yeah, we had an amazingly privileged life. It was just fantastic. But, you know, it all changed and the same issues occurred because I was always away. Someone was always away. One of the parents were always away. And then we had our second child, and it was starting to get difficult. And I always had a hankering to go farming. And due to personal situation and circumstances with my parents, in their passing, we then decided to move to Australia and go farming. So yeah, from the kettle pan into the frying pan was not having farmed before. It's been a great challenge and a steep learning curve. And certainly one I'm up for. You know, it's very exciting. It's very challenging. I never understood the seasons and the dryness and the variability of climate and etc. And suddenly when you're on the land, gosh, they really do. You live by them. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, when we started speaking before we hit record, we already talked a lot about weather and climate and seasons. It's something that becomes dominating in when you're relying on rainfall and sunshine.
That's true.
And your operation is purely sheep, or like tell us a little bit more about the type of operation you have.
We had. I started out in the area that we are in is ostensibly a breeding area. So we've got sheep, and it's a self-replacing superfine wool merino. I also then have a dual purpose flock of Dooney merinos, which I am looking more on from the meat side, and trying to simplify the operation without having a whole lot of different enterprises. And then because of where we are, we also have an Angus cattle breeding operation. But as a total, I think we sort of in that 70% of the operation is sheep and 30% is cattle, and that's really come forward now in the last 2 years with the severe drought that we've had. A lot of people that had gone more into cattle and less into sheep have now started to switch over and realize that the operation needs to be more, especially up here, needs to be more sheep and less cattle. Yeah, it's been very tough. These last 2 years have really been tough.
And these kind of decisions, are they based on the pastures, or why do you see this realization that you should have a bigger sheep than cattle operation? What is that based on?
It's based on pastures. It's based on the ability when it starts to get dry, you need to. Well, I sold. So I've sold all my cows. I've got 2 bulls left now. And Denzel it's Steve and Muzzer now. They've got names.
Yeah.
But no, I'm because they're the only 2 left. No, so I sold all those. But generally what, a lot of people end up happening is that it's easier to feed sheep than it is cattle. Cattle take on so much more food if you're going to be feeding them. But, just the way I've structured and my principles and, the whole roundedness of it, I decided where one's matching one's stocking rates to one's carrying capacity and trying not to feed. Because as soon as you start feeding, you affect a whole lot of other things. It's like a domino effect, where suddenly, it's, yeah. So yes, I do feed, because the problem that we have in our area is that like you end up with this feed gap in winter where everything browns off and there's not enough nutrition, and it's the time when the ewes are lambing, and so you've got to keep the energy up to them, and so you've got to that's just the way it is, It's very difficult up in our area, to not have to feed. So that's why I've sort of structured it. But I've also now realized after these last 2 years that we have a carrying capacity of how much grass you potentially could grow in a year, and everyone bases it on the amount of rainfall and how much is growing. But over the last period of time, we've been below average rainfall for I don't know how many years, and it's just so everyone's. So now I've created I've put in a sort of a buffer, where I have in that buffer I will have stock like wethers, which are purely for wool, that should it go dry again, I can sell those off without selling breeding stock. So I'll have fewer numbers and a bigger changing gap, that I can, it's almost like a pressure release valve where I can release that pressure from the stocking rate, without affecting the breeding stock that one spends so much time trying to master. in that breeding stock. And so I think, you know, going forward now, I'm where you've almost got that sort of 35% buffer zone that I will carry in wethers or in cattle that aren't for breeding purposes.
You
It's
mentioned,
yeah, it's a challenge.
Mhm. But you mentioned a domino effect when you start feeding. Can you briefly explain what that
Yeah,
means?
yeah, because what happens with that is that you know it's that whole thing trying to where you're almost trying to breed an animal that is fit for purpose. So as soon as and it happens where they start becoming reliant, I mean, you know, they're not stupid and they pick up very quickly that if I just stand at the gate or close to the gate, I know that I'm going to get fed all the time. And so I don't have to go looking out. And also their performance. You're trying to find animals that can perform, produce rear a young without with the least amount of input from you as a farmer. So when you start feeding, the one thing is that yes, you're feeding, but I will in feeding, for example, now sometimes I'll use that feeding as a management tool. So say I've got an erosion gully or I've got something that I'll put a bale of hay there so that, or a bale of hay on a blackberry bush. And what happens is that those animals feed around that and they break and you end up getting this, the animal impact where you want the animal impact for management. You're almost using it as a tool to try and you've got a reason for putting it there. So you're trying to achieve the outcome for that purpose. You know, it's a whole, the thing with feeding is that if you are supplementing their food, it must be that the grass or food that they are getting is going to get less and less and less. So what you're doing is you are depleting that reserve of grass where you suddenly then start overgrazing, which when it does rain again, that plant doesn't have the reserves to be able to grow again, and it's going to take longer to grow and come out of that. So underneath the soil, that plant's whole reserve occurs in its root mass underneath the soil. And every time you graze it and knock it down until it's overgrazed, it's taking all its energy from that root ball, and the root ball's getting smaller and smaller. And so suddenly it doesn't have the energy to be able to, and it dies. And that's a big problem with, so one of the things is that you're trying to alleviate, of overgrazing, where that stresses the plants out and then it upsets everything else that goes with it, all your microbiology in the soil, everything else. And that's the reason why you're just trying to create and maintain these healthy, different ecosystems. And in all these varying parts, is really trying to hold them all together, all these balls, and so that they're all happy. As soon as one goes out of kilter, it affects everything else around it. And that's really where I was talking about that domino effect. It throws everything else then out of kilter.
Yeah.
Because the
Okay.
one has gone
Yeah.
to the side.
Okay. Well, thanks for explaining that.
Not at all.
And you moved to a farm that is called Balala, and it has a very long history. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of that farm?
Yeah, we were out here for Christmas in 2010, and we came up to the New England, to Armidale, to have a look at properties and to see whether it was the right move or not the right move, and just to get a feel for the area. And we visited a whole lot of properties, and I'd seen Balala had come up and it was on the list. And we arrived, and it's funny, you know, properties pick their owners. And so we arrived, and it was like, and it was just so funny because I just looked at Sarah and I said, you know, this is the property. It is, it was too wet to drive around, so we never drove around the property. It was a very rundown property. The property was one of the first properties established in this New England area in the 1840s. And they, in its day, had 38 families working on it. It was 99,000 acres. It was a big run. They shore 45,000 sheep here. And slowly with time and succession, and it ended up where we were fortunate enough to be able to get the last remaining 3,000 acres of the property. The house that we're in is, if not the longest, certainly one of the longest, and there are not a lot of them, continually lived in timber slabbed buildings in Australia. And it was very rundown. You know, we started with 6 paddocks, I think. The fencing was not great. There were no dams on the property. So, you know, everything fed from these creeks. Water security was a big issue. And why? You know, it was out of all the properties, it was one that presented the most challenge. And, you know, it comes back down to, like all of these things, that, you know, I think having challenges keeps you young, you know, not that I'm old, but I mean, but it just gives you a drive to do, you know, to take things on. So yeah, it's steeped in an enormous amount of history and connection to communities within this area. There are a lot of families who have worked on Balala who still live in the towns of our 2 closest towns of Uralla and Armidale. A lot of those families, descendants, were either born on Balala or had worked here for many, many years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a big privilege to be able to. It is a privilege holding onto a property with so much history.
Yeah, but I find it interesting that even though it was rundown, had to have a lot of investment and time, and it spoke to you. So
it did, yeah. It was fun. It was, you know, but that's the thing, you know, it was weird. Yeah, you just look at it and it was like, yeah, this is it. I mean, and why, you know, one was that it had good water security, and that in its day, if they had picked it, it must have been, and they had first choice, it must have been a pretty good area. And, you know, there is saying that it's the name Balala it's either a good hunting ground, or it's a place of plenty, or there's some meaning around that word along those lines. And so, yeah, I thought, you know, if they'd done it then, yeah, you know, that's why we took it on.
yeah.
The bones are good. The bones are very good.
And you already mentioned a little bit, like you had to put in better fencing. Tell us a little bit more how you got Balala back into shape.
One of the big things in there was I had in my head that I need to create areas. I need to have protection areas. And one of those back then was to fence off all the creeks, all the riparian areas were to fence those off. And so through funding as well through Caring for Our Country and that, I started down the road of fencing and getting grant and putting in my own money and my own time. And so I started fencing off the creeks, which have all been fenced off now. So there's a lot of off-farm water that has been created. I've put in a lot of dams. I've put in a lot of water storage and piped water to troughs. You know, kilometers and kilometers of it. And and breaking these big paddocks, you know, 500-acre paddocks into smaller paddocks that are more manageable. So I can then have an element where I can have planned grazing and actually control where the animals are going to eat and why they're going to eat there, and make them eat in areas where they aren't so selective. You know, they'll take a 500 paddock and they'll go through it and they'll eat all the best grass first, and then go down the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. Whereas here I'm creating and I'm allowing that grass to be eaten with bigger numbers, so they can't be as selective. Otherwise they're going to miss out. So they're going to eat. And then I move them on and I let it rest. And I let that root ball, basically coming back to, try and get that root ball to be more established and deeper, so that I can try and become more resilient in these testing times of climate.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got to 41 kilometers of fencing the other day that I've done myself. So it's been, we're getting there.
You were busy.
About halfway.
Yeah. And what you just explained with the fencing and creating smaller paddocks, that's would you say that is land management, soil management, everything? Take us a little bit through the environmental credentials that your farm holds and how that works.
So a huge part of this whole thing is that it's this question of holism, in the sense that if I let areas rest, I can get more plants growing there. So more trees can be reestablished and there can be more regrowth. You're getting a greater variety. You're not only getting grasses growing, you're getting other herbaceous plants and forbs and other broadleafed plants growing, which are all really important, and they all have a function in this whole biodiversity and the whole landscape. You know, it's everything. I'm trying to create this functioning landscape where the water goes back into the soil, everything goes. I'm maximizing the amount of solar energy that I'm creating through photosynthesis. I'm getting diversity. I'm getting a pyramid of life happening, and sheep and cattle are just in that pyramid as herbivores. You know, above that in the soil, or below that in the soil, I've also got all the predators and everything that occurred on there. And above it, you know, the predators being, you know, that hopefully you're getting other wildlife that occurs in the pyramid. So the cattle and the sheep are just in that level of herbivores in there. So we've got, you know, with all the kangaroos and the koalas and the platypus and their echidnas and everything, but it's just creating this environment that is whole. You know, you're not, it's not skewed in one way, only one way. You're just trying to create this whole of landscape function.
Well, by the sound of it, you can soon go on safari again then, if you have a lot of other animals on your property.
It does feel like that. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
you know, it's always special when you see a koala in a tree, or You know, the platypus are very friendly. And yeah, it's lovely. It is. It's good. Seeing eagles soar, and it just makes you feel good. It gives you a positive energy.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And you also have put some animal welfare programs in place. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think because I'm new to farming, I am not governed by practices of the past. I can choose myself whether I want to do them or not do them. And so with animal welfare, we spend an enormous amount of time and effort in giving the best to those animals from a feed perspective. Yes, we do use them as tools in the management function of the property. So like when I talk of tools, I'm talking about them as ruminants, which are basically putting their dung back into the soil. They're keeping grasses short. They're not allowing grasses to oxidize. They're bringing that vegetative matter back to the soil surface so that microbes in the soil can feed. And so you just end up with this healthy whole system, and they're just tools in that. So, but even so, the animal welfare practices are, I think, just fundamental in us as farmers pursuing the best practice that we can for the animals that we are looking after. We've chosen to do certain things to those animals and in the domestication of them. And so therefore, we've got to be responsible to make sure that we are doing it in an ethical manner. And I know I'm going down, I could go down the mulesing debate. And I haven't mules, and I think it just doesn't. I know that we genetically can breed and have plainer-bodied animals, and I've seen it with a plain-bodied dual-purpose Dooney sheep. My merino superfine wool sheep haven't been mulesed, and I've bought them from seed stock producers like studs, where they don't mulese either. So that's the one thing. The other issues around pain relief for some of the animal husbandry practices, like during lamb marking and tail docking and that, it's fantastic now. So that there have been anesthetic and analgesic drugs now that can be used during these practices. So yeah, I mean, this last year I done the gold standard of it by having both analgesic and anesthetic drugs in lamb marking, for that short-term pain relief and the longer-term pain relief. So using things like numbnuts, which injects, it's an anesthetic, but also giving them an analgesic with like a buckalgesic into their, which is a different acting drug, which acts more on the longer term pain. So yeah, it's a big debate, and I can't believe it's been going on for so long. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah.
But that comes also with an additional cost, but you work that into your operation, that if you buy analgesic and anesthetics.
Yeah, it does. But I mean, that's the cost of holding those or looking after those animals. I mean, we've decided to take that on, and those costs have to be built in. And I know that it becomes a whole different game, but it's all economies of scale. So if I've got 20,000 sheep, suddenly that's a big cost. But it's no different to the cost because your income and turnover is also that much higher than if I've got 100 sheep, So it's all relative. I mean, it's still cost per animal, but that revenue and the turnover for that animal is also a lot higher. It's a numbers. Yeah. When
Okay.
you're getting into the 20,000 sheep, it's just big operations, but your turnover is a lot bigger. So it's just one of those things that you have to, if you want to have animals, then face up to the fact that there are costs involved in running those animals, because that is the responsibility of us as farmers to give them the best care that we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel very, yeah. So I'm very involved in the animal welfare side of it, on varying committees, etc. But yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for being so open about it, because it's often, yeah, as you say, it's a debate, and sometimes it's like, let's not better go there. But thank you for
No,
going into
yeah.
that.
No, I mean, I know, Elizabeth, that, fly strike is an issue in in Australia, but it's also an issue in the rest of the world as well. I mean, coming from South Africa, we certainly had blowflies and they perform an incredibly important function in an ecosystem for decaying matter. It's yeah, thinking that we can take them out the system to alleviate the problems of fly strike on sheep is just, they've got a huge function in the whole in the whole landscape, in the whole functioning thing of the environment.
Well, I've never heard someone say something in the defense of a fly strike, so that is good to know as well. Yeah, you always think of them as a problem, but never as a contributor. So you're right.
Yeah, yeah.
You're right about that. And also, what I find fascinating nowadays in farming is that you actually, technology is also entering the farm more and more, and you're making more and more use to be more efficient and to have better data to make better informed decisions. Is there any technical equipment or any agricultural innovation that you have recently included on your farm?
Elizabeth, I've always so from the beginning, I have put in electronic identification devices into the U portion of the flock, purely on the basis that I could, when you're looking at 100 sheep, they all look the same, and so therefore it just becomes one mob, and you put an average on the one mob of those 100, 1,000, 10,000, whatever. But because they look the same, whereas if they've got a number, then they become individuals, and every individual is different in all of us, and so I've used that electronic identification system right from the very beginning, but it's been really difficult in trying to get the full use of it, and now I'm trying to work through this whole efficiency and the fitness of an animal and how productive it is, and individual indexing of these animals. So I've always used weighing. I have the identification reader. I can individually identify individual animals through a wand that reads the electronic code. I preg scan the sheep. I've started, I had started fleece weighing and fiber testing all the the fleeces at shearing time on the ewes. It took a bit of a turn over these last couple of years with the drought. There were other things that I was trying to chase my tail and keep ahead of. But I did it again this year. I fleece tested all the animals, and I found a person now, a provider, sheep data management, that is able to collate that information to me, for me at least, and to be able to come up and say that under those criteria, these sheep are performing the best and these are the worst. So coming back into that 30% or 35% buffer for dry times, which are your least performing animals that you can then also take out and sell those animals before you sell your top producing ewe, because it's all just a numbers, it's all a mob based thing. So those are the reasons, and it's being able to focus on those aspects and those individual animals, and to improve, because we're all trying to, you're trying to improve your product for consumer, for also just for yourself, because it's not farming. This is a business. It's like any other business. It has to make a profit. There's got to be a turn. Yeah. So that's I've used a bit of that, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I actually wrote my thesis like, I don't know, like 10 years ago about RFID, but used not on sheep, but in the retail store. So yeah, I think that's, it's been around for some time, but it's good to see it also in practice now.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot that's going to happen in this space, Elizabeth. I think, when you talk of that RFID thing and in retail, it's going to be the same. One has a product, and I'm coming down to this whole blockchain story in that, it's we as producers now have got a product, and instead of it's trying to be individual about our product, and putting ourselves out there on credentials for that. But somehow one has to be able to identify that. And this is where that whole side comes in, whether it be blockchain or whether it be, an RFID for a property, and knowing those QR codes or, something, but it's all along, it's all along those lines. And yeah, I mean, there's some incredibly exciting things and innovative ideas that are coming forward in this space.
Yeah. And this podcast is also in partnership with the Schneider Group for their Authentico scheme, and you joined the Authentico scheme. And tell us a little bit about your motivation to join, because I assume it is also part of what we just discussed, of creating a product, connecting to the consumers.
Yes, yeah, very much so. I think that, like any of it, there's an element of mass production. I can understand that, but there's also a sector of elitism in the sense of quality of product, and it's like, and wool being one of those. So in taking all these practices and you're doing them for yourself, and you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Two, you're also doing it because so that you can farm in an ecological way that you are benefiting. Two, that I'm also could be sequestering carbon into the soil through farming practices. So there's a community driven aspect that occurs there. And then when it comes to that, one of the hardest things that I find is that you aren't able to market your product for yourself. You sell on auction, you sell in the sale yards, you sell as wool, and yes, it's on product and it's on quality and etc. But it's not actually on the foundation or the base of what your principles are. And so, in joining Authentico, it enables one to work with the Schneider Group, in the sense that you can say, these are the principles and this is what I'm trying to be doing. Because that comes on to a whole nother thing. I think within the next period of time, for example, the whole story around carbonized wool. So along those lines of sequestering carbon, and our industry, the red meat industry in Australia at the moment, in trying to be carbon neutral by 2030, is a huge challenge. But, I think that for producers to take it on, that if they can get that product recognized that you are carbon neutral in your product, I think is going to be a huge bonus for producers, and also the uptake of that. We went through it with the mulesing story. I'm going to carry on mulesing because I'm not getting any increased price for my wool, because even if I mules or don't mule, so why, now that gap is getting wider and wider, and you're getting far more for non-mulesed wool than you are for mulesed wool. So in any of these things, for change to be adopted, there has to be the price indicators that consumers are going to drive this change. And the consumers are the one now saying, you need to change, otherwise you're not going to buy your product anymore. And, one has to take heed of that. And so, but it had already been started prior to that, because it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad now, being involved with Authentico, that it's, that there
being
is
recognized, and that there's a way to showcase your work.
Yes. And and it makes you feel good on top of it.
And is there something that you would like to learn more from the continued supply chain, like once you leave your farm? Because one way is that you can communicate more about what you're doing, but is there also something that you would like to receive or learn more about the other way?
Yes, in the sense that it's that whole question of being a business and being professional. You need to know, one, and I don't know enough about it, and I know that I don't know, and I need to change. But you know how to get the product, but the process from the product to the consumer is the difficult bit, because now it goes through a whole variety of other, retailers and spinners, and and that side, I need to start trying to work out how to get the full concept of the full idea of being a part of this team that takes that yarn of wool, and where it actually goes to at the end, is, I need to do that more, in the sense that, and also the same from the red meat side, from the dual purpose side, it's for me, it's a big thing of it is knowing the quality and the nutrient density of the product that I've created or selling. But I need to try and bring those terms of trade back to the farm as well, instead of just sending it into the supply chain, into the supermarket and whatever. Not that there's a problem with that, but it's just, because it enables you to take responsibility of your actions that you're doing on property.
And do you see, is there a certain way that maybe wool growers like yourself and the rest of the supply chain could connect more? Do you have an idea how we could enable that more?
Yeah, I'm involved with another cooperative called Ethical Merino. It's based around ethical merino production in wool. I'm also involved in some of the state body on the wool committees and that. I somehow need to, so almost like agri-politics in the sense that you're getting involved in some of these bodies that are determining, or not determining, but that are in that line. I don't know how to get above that into the processing and try and understand that. Yeah, and I think it is important that I do that. And but at the moment, all I've been able to do is stay on those lines from a, I want to say agri-politics side, but yeah. You know, you can't carry on complaining or doing that if you're not prepared to, put the time in. Yes, it's a minefield, but you've at least somewhere there's a voice coming forward, and a representation.
Yeah. No, but what I understand from Authentico, that's also the goal of the scheme, that it does connect the whole supply chain more together. So hopefully in the future there will be also more and more feedback coming your way as well.
I hope so. I have spoken to Willie Garcia with regards carbonized wool, and I think that there is certainly an opportunity, and to try and get involved in that. I'm one of the farms in Meat and Livestock Australia's carbon neutral 2030 project that they are doing, trying to work out how to get it monitored. So being involved, being involved in that, so that there's a positive on your product side, but also there's a positive for humanity. You're doing something for humanity and our world and globally.
Yeah. Well, Richard, we've already been talking for quite some time, so I would like to come to a close. But maybe let's end this interview maybe with a story that I don't know, when you go to a party or you're somewhere, is there like a certain story that you always kind of end up telling that is somehow related to sheep or sheep farming?
There's I think what happens in this is that in these discussions and the story is you always end up with this where you always end up talking and being and yes, I'm incredibly passionate about what I do now, and so I always get tied in and end up talking about whether it's the soil or regenerative farming or holistic management or, all of those things. But yeah, I mean, it's the farming side is when you're always in the same community and talking about it is one thing, but it's like any of these things, you end up where the experiences in life, whether it be on horseback, on safari, or walking with elephants, it's those are all experiences that come forward, and it's an expression of yourself, and it's an expression of your life. And farming is one of those at now, where you almost become boring because you end up talking about farming now, and the weather and when is it going to rain again, and so Yeah, yeah. You try not to be boring, though.
Okay. Well, when people who are listening also would like to connect more directly with you and find out more about your operation, where can they go? Do you have a website or are you active on social media?
Yeah, I'm active on social. Well, not. I'm not. I'm a bit of a Luddite. I'm not very good at social media. I try, but I have a website, which is balala.com.au, and then it's under my, under Richard Daugherty within Facebook. But yeah, and I do a lot of blogs and write articles and that on the Facebook, on the website, whether it's dry aging or whether it's soil health or whether it's, and those are, and it's just putting it out there, things that are running through my head, and trying to, just thinking. So that's where I can get, and my email is on that website as well, and more than happy to talk about anything.
Yeah, I had a look at your website and it's really great, and there's a lot of information and also lots more interviews with you. So I would encourage everyone who would want to find out more to visit your website, and I will link to them in the show notes. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for your time. It's the afternoon.
Elizabeth, thank you.
For you, so you probably have to go back out to your sheep.
Yeah, the day hasn't finished yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
but it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, and I feel very privileged to have just try to share a story, and get people out there, to get more people sheep farming.
Yes, definitely. Okay. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was a little bit on the longer side, but I didn't want to edit any of it because I thought it was really interesting that we could go quite deep into some of the discussions. If you want to find out more, then head on over to the show notes at elizabethvandelden.com/116. And I will also link to the website of Richard on that page. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Of course, I'll also link to the Schneider Group's website and the Authentico scheme in case you're interested to find out more. And there's also a big conference going on organized by the Schneider Group. And I have the honor of moderating that event and also preparing the event with the rest of the Schneider Group team. So it'll be very exciting. It's called Wool Connect, and anyone can join, and there will be lots of retail brands who will speak about the current market demand for wool and what is required, but also a lot of other service providers to the wool industry who are sharing their solutions on how to handle some of the issues that we are facing within the wool industry. So I think it'll be a really interesting event. It's an online event, online conference via Zoom, so anyone can join. If the time zones don't work out, then you can access the videos also at a later stage once you've purchased this ticket. And what else is there to say? Yeah, it's on the 6th, 7th, and 8th of October. Always for 2 hours online conference. So check it out. I will also link in the show notes, or you head on over to gschneider.com/conference. And there you can find out all about the wonderful speakers and how this event will go about. So I hope you found this interesting. I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks' time, and bye for now.